After looking at Chat GPT, I questioned my purpose in life. It's like, what am I here for? And am I able to actually put a better thought together than this damn stupid machine? Doesn't that terrify you?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, and if you're a project manager and you've got all these deliverables and you've got a complex way, like that's kind of the higher end application of it. But yeah, it's all terrifying. I think I've learned to be okay with being terrified. I think
after the last 4 years, right? 3 years.
I just relaxed into being terrified.
Just live in a constant state of terror. Welcome to humanity. Relaxing and terrifying at the same time. What a mix. So Jack, I discovered it because of one of your videos, and that led me to play with it myself. And afterwards, I felt this sense of meaninglessness and purposelessness kind of wash over me. And I know you're a microbiologist and not a psychologist, but why do you think I had that experience, that existential dread in response to this chatbot?
Yeah, so hi everyone. It's also not very clear why I felt that too. I think it comes down to how we value ourselves as professionals, and in my case as a teacher, all the things that I thought I brought to a professional environment, the value of that is approaching zero, as the AI people like to say. And we have to find new ways of redefining what it is that we bring within our own jobs, within our own context. And that's a confronting thing to think about. And this has just accelerated that thinking process by 10, 15, 20 years, perhaps. That's why it scared me.
Yeah, because as a professor, you put a lot of self-worth into your work, right? It gives you meaning and purpose to your life. And if this computer can replace it, or this AI algorithm can replace you, then what does that mean for the purpose of your existence, right?
Yeah, not to get too deep on it. Yeah, just the purpose of my existence. But I mean, professors aren't exactly the kind of the most vulnerable job out there necessarily, but it is the one that spends probably the most amount of time thinking about kind of our value day to day, because we do have to justify consistently within the confines of academia and other faculty members and stuff. And so this is a constant thought experiment that we have to go through. What is it that we bring uniquely to our institution, to academia? And that's a discussion I'm having a lot with sort of my students as well and my colleagues. The online shift to online teaching accelerated that a lot as well. And then there's one more, hopefully not nail in the coffin, but one more thing to change our thinking all over again.
You know, I think I'm a beg to differ, Jack. After looking at Chat GPT, I questioned my purpose in life. It's like, what am I here for? And am I able to actually put a better thought together than this damn stupid machine? It was an existential moment for me to some degree.
Well, we are delighted to have Jack Wang here on the Sense and Signal podcast. He is an Associate Professor of Microbiology at the University of Queensland in Australia. He also has an extensive information technology background. He's also a videographer, as I've just kind of shared with the opening question, and a YouTuber. And that's how I discovered Jack's work. And he was also voted University Teacher of the Year in Australia for 2020. So we are super pleased to have Jack on the Sense and Signal podcast. And I'm Dan Tarker, one of the co-hosts, and I'm here with my co-host, Jodah Jensen. Right, Jodah?
Yeah, Jodah Jensen. And I'm also the other co-host. That's correct. And I come from the world of product development.
So what made you interested, Jack, in Chat GPT?
Yeah, until very recently, I knew nothing about it, like most of us. I was in an Uber going to my first neuroscience conference. By the way, I'm not a neuroscientist, but I was invited to go to a neuroscience conference. And on the way to the neuroscience conference, like we do, we kind of scroll through hashtags maybe relevant to the conference and see what's going on. And this hashtag GPT-3 just kept flooding my feed. I was like, well, what is this? Like, everyone's talking about it like it's been around forever. And it was talked about within the context of academic integrity in another conference that was happening at the same time, right? And they were talking about, everything's over. It was very doom and gloom. It was very existential. Wow, my Twitter.
I'm not alone.
Yeah,
I'm not alone.
Everyone's going crazy over this. What's going on? And then, look, a lot of our discussions in universities and colleges focus around looking at what students are doing to kind of cheat the system, and has looked at it through that lens. But I'm much more interested in the other perspective, which is, hey, what is the long-term view of this? Because the short-term view, of course, is how people will use and abuse it. But the longer-term vision is, well, it's not the individuals misusing it that I'm concerned about. It's about big institutions incorporating it as part of business as usual. That's what's the more transformational perspective. Like, you think individuals misuse it on this level, but yeah, corporations, big institutions, they will integrate it at a scale that we're just not even considering at the moment. So that's kind of why I started making those videos. And again, it's within a very insular view of how will AI affect me personally as a professor. And now I'm starting to think more broadly, like, what are the long-term ramifications for everyone?
And I think we're going to get into some of maybe the darker aspects of Chat GPT too, and the fact that we're not seeing it fully. Like, we're seeing one example of this chat bot, and there might be a more powerful one that we haven't been exposed to yet. But so what was your first reaction when you started playing with it? Did you have the same kind of existential crisis your colleagues were having in their expressing in their social media?
So my first reaction was about the user interface. Yeah, because I come from an information technology background, and UX is really interesting to me. I was like, this is deceptively simple, right? That's part of its allure. Like, it's just a box. You just type into it and things come back. It wasn't anywhere near as kind of superficially front-loaded with wizardry like most of the apps that we are given these days. If there's a new app, you log into it, it's very shiny and new, and it's got colors and lots of things happening on screen to distract us or to try to retain us. But this wasn't it. It didn't need any of that.
It's pretty amazing.
It just had a very, very simple interface, and it just had this kind of way of making you want to talk to a little bit more. And the responses it was coming back, because I looked at it from not just a teacher, but as a YouTube video producer, and I was thinking, well, scripting videos is the biggest headache in my workflow. Like, well, do I really want to script everything, every word? Do I just want to go off the cuff like I do in my classes? But then that's a huge pain to edit, as you probably would know. If you were going off the cuff, probably half the things you probably hit at a higher rate. Maybe you like 75% of the things you say are really profound, and then there's a small percentage
90%.
Track off. For me,
no, 30. We're like 30%.
It's 50-50 for me on a really good day. Most days it's lower than that. So scripting does save a bit of time. So can this tool assist me in that kind of small sphere of my workflow? And look, it really can, because it gives you kind of all the breadth of wisdom out there within a single breath, really. Whereas
so you've opened the door on this on some level, right? And that it's a Pandora's box, though. So you're right now using this very simplistic interface and engineering feat that, again, we're not even quite sure to what degree how deep this goes, what they've actually released or unleashed, one might even say, on a society. And you are leveraging it in a way, I think, as an academic or anybody who's a content creator would. But where's the slippery slope on this? I mean, at what point will they start to understand your voice, and then starts to mimic your voice? and then in some respects it would be. And to what degree, again, to that existential issue, does it sort of take over for you, where you just say, all right, I want a script on teaching my students this, bam, in the voice of Jack, Jack's voice there. Is that scary? Is that good? Is that a plus? Is that a boon to the career? Is that something we're concerned about?
And that's the question I've tried to answer in my videos, and I have to keep trying to answer. What are ways that we could leverage it for our own benefit and productivity? Because that's kind of what will ultimately shift the frame of mind of people in senior management, for instance, if they see it as an assistant rather than a replacement. And for my context, I'm not too concerned with it outright replacing me, because we've been through this experience very recently with the shift to online teaching in academia. A lot of professors pretty much during the first months in 2020 couldn't go to class anymore. So they used video content from previous years and then responded to student questions via chat dialogue. That's how we kind of ran a lot of our classes in COVID. And we thought this was perfectly normal because students weren't turning up to class that much previously. They're watching these videos. It's the same videos. And now we're doing even more work to kind of stay one-on-one with them online. That should work. The students just absolutely despised it and almost basically started a revolution to ask for their money back. So as long as the human connection is a mandate within your context, which is I guess a huge if, then your job's value is measured through that interaction more so than other things. I thought it was more the other things. I thought it was the things I was producing, but no, it turns out it's just me physically being there is a huge part of it.
So there's a pheromone capacity there. There's I guess it's not even biological in that sense, because you're saying just being present on a screen is somehow a good facsimile of that connection. But you don't think that this is different? And again, we always say that too, right? This is different. But I would argue, or I could argue, that one would say, oh my goodness, these cell phones, they're going to ruin the world back in 2008 and blah, 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 and all these bad things that were going to happen. And I would argue to some degree, all those bad things did happen. And we're actually living with the ramifications of like social networking and people leveraging phones. We're adapting. We have a world that seems to be adapting. But I think there has been again, I can argue this. I think there has been there have been negative effects, serious negative social effects with these new tools that we're still literally coming to terms with and figuring out. So kind of perhaps the damage comes in sort of sideways, not direct in the way you might think, but you don't think this is a little different maybe?
I think it's very different, but I think our approach to it has to be very, very similar in that we do have to assimilate and adapt in a very systematic way. If we were jumping and being ad hoc and responding to different things, that just makes it hard on us, I think, to respond in a day in, day out kind of approach. And I was watching an interview with one of OpenAI's co-founders, I think a guy called Sam Altman, and he was saying that a lot of the predictions in this space just are really difficult to make sure they're accurate 10, 20, 30 years out from when the prediction is made. And there's nothing quicker. There's no quicker way of looking dumb than making a prediction about something that's, well, now it's like 2 months in the future. If you make a prediction, you look really silly. In my field, microbiology, that's happened again and again in the pandemic. People make predictions about the virus and how infectious or deadly it will be, and then everything flips. So the interesting thing about this, and then your point about why it's quite different, is that everyone's predictions about AI were that it would be the lower, quote unquote, lower end of the labor force, the kind of blue collar jobs that were doing hands-on repetitive things that would get automated away first. And then they would come for the sort of the mid-tier white collar jobs, and then maybe the higher end cognitive tasks that we do. And then it would never come and replace the creatives, the poets, the musicians, the artists, because that has this ineffable creative element that robotics can never replicate. And it's right now gone the exact opposite, right? It's come for the creative sector first. And because maybe the actualization of hands-on machinery is more costly, maybe in the short term, the lower end of the labor market, the blue collar jobs, they're not quite as effective right now. So you can't really make a prediction that far forward accurately. But what we have to do is, anytime a change comes around, how do we adapt?
And I think that adaptation question is very interesting, especially in terms of higher education and teaching, which is a space you work in and you've been doing a lot of talking about. I know there's a lot of conversation around right now around whether, should, colleges ban Chat GPT, or should we just embrace it and teach students how to use it? And I think from my perspective, most of the wiser faculty I've heard speak to this have said, no, it's a technology that's here to stay in some form, and we need to teach students how to use it, how to incorporate it into their learning. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I read recently a couple of New York City school districts have banned not just students but teachers from using ChatGPT as well, and that ban is a bit of a moot point because I mean everyone's trying to get on, so it's probably like not available due to popularity already. You know, like it's probably not that accessible regardless. And I think professors and universities and teachers are often accused of being kind of out of touch with the real world and having this protectionist mindset about
Right.
classrooms, and students don't really kind of engage with that kind of thinking. They're thinking, well, you're asking me to memorize these 100 pages, but in any work environment, I don't really memorize anything other than kind of my basic routine, and everything else I'm searching for and
Right.
Googling online. But how I'm getting judged is this ability to memorize and regurgitate, you know, this thing. So it doesn't track. You know, that's why a lot of people go into entrepreneurship, go into business, because they think, hey, this system is not really in sync with where I'd want to go and what the professional world is like. And if we go that route of banning technologies that are all the rage and used everywhere else, and especially as we talked about, if it's going to be integrated into corporate conceptualizations of work, and if we ban it at the university sector, that's going to further alienate the students, I think, if not make us a little less
I used
relevant.
it the other day to help me with some budgeting for my department, and gave it the variables, and it started spitting out, you know, a process for developing a budget, and gave me some projections. So it's just a good sounding board to develop ideas for how to operate your workplace. So I could definitely see it as kind of as a tool, not kind of a tool, but as a tool that you'd use in a management position or a number of different positions. Which I guess brings us to, you know, your field, science. How do you see this impacting employment in the sciences? Is it going to put any scientists out of jobs? Is it going to affect labs? What do you see for the future of science with this technology?
The issue with scientific jobs is that, like many sectors now, but we were on this tip a lot earlier, it is vastly unstable because the cycles of innovation kind of mandate that you sort of upskill and then push forward really, really quickly. So people who work as a research scientist, as like say a postdoctoral research fellow, they go on sort of year-to-year contracts, and if you get a 3-year contract or a 5-year contract, that's almost unheard of. And the same kind of applies if you're primarily kind of a research income-driven professor at a research-intensive university. So in terms of employment in science, it's never been that stable, right? It's never been like with and tenure is kind of a bit of a joke. Like it's not really a thing anymore. Right?
Depends on where you work.
So it depends on where you work, yeah. But you're raising it as a concept is interesting, right? It's almost about how much leverage the unions had if there were unions at all. So I guess if stability was the question mark, or the lack of stability resulting from this technology, well, from the sciences, we never expected that. We never had that in mind when we joined. We always entered it with our eyes wide open to say, hey, we have to constantly prove our game every day. Now, again, the disruption is not at the moment going to be at the lab bench front, because again, the robotics that, for example, put a 96-cell plate full of cells into an incubator, which is a thing in big institutes. They don't want to pay people to move a plate from one box to another. They'll have a robot to do it. They're super expensive, not just to buy initially, but to maintain. So that was the kind of initial obstacle for entry, for automating that end of it away, which a lot of people would love to do. Let's say you're doing drug screening of like 100,000 drugs. You kind of want that process to be really, really consistent and have minimal variability. But it hasn't really taken off because a lot of the really, really interesting research isn't happening in those big facilities. It's happening with individual academics doing their work in all sorts of areas all across the world, right? So you really want that access to research and access to innovation to be as low cost as possible initially. So automating on the lab bench, doing the physical experiments with your hands, that doesn't seem to be something that has happened at a pace that would threaten our employability in that area. But again, it's that paradigm shift. It's at the top end, right? So it's the people thinking of the research questions, the lab heads who are trying to figure out new keywords to integrate into the grant proposal that were allowed to open up to other fields. And I mean, I don't think any lab head would think there's too many lab heads in the world. I don't think that's a thing anyone thinks. But it is a competitive process, right? And maybe instead of having to collaborate with 3 or 4 other lab heads to come up with a really compelling proposal that spans across multiple fields, AI could assist fewer senior scientists in conceptualizing the next area of their work, the next question to ask in the field. And that's maybe where the disruption is going to come, not at the lower end that people were projecting.
So I've used it also recently, Dan, in my work where I was asked to bring two concepts together where they were like, I'm not sure if these things are interrelated. So I said, let's see if Chat GPT says different. Let's ask it. How are these things related? Lo and behold, the beauty of it will prove it will. I don't think it does a very good job of proving null hypotheses. It's going to do what I asked it to do, and it did it quite well. And I felt guilty leveraging it. Because it challenged the basic notion of why I'm hired, which is to be knowledgeable. How do you what do you tell me in that circumstance? You guys are my therapists. What do I do with that?
The analogy I use when thinking about Chat GPT is Star Trek. Captain Kirk and Spock and McCoy on the bridge with everyone. And, they always go, computer, tell us this. And the computer spits out all this information. They might throw in a couple other variables that they want the computer to synthesize for them. But ultimately, they still have to take that information and turn it into knowledge, right? Because there's the information that it's giving you, but then you as a human and your capacity to make sense of that information produces the knowledge, what to do next, how to respond to that information.
Right. The funny thing about that is I would say, based on human condition, if that thing really did exist the way it did, it would be a different Star Trek than they portrayed it. It would be a bunch of really sloth, overweight people sitting around letting the computer do all the heavy lifting, because we have a tendency to let that, if it comes in and it picks up the weight, we'll give it the weight. I think it's both a conscious and a subconscious thing.
Than Star Trek.
I have a feeling it would be. I think that's a Pollyanna sort of approach to probably what would happen if AI became as sentient and powerful as that was. It's beautiful. I love the symbiotic relationship. I have not that much faith in the human being. Again, correct me, please.
Faith in humanity.
Faith in humanity. Correct that, please. Correct that.
So again, it comes down to not so much, I don't think you have to feel guilty at all for using it, but it depends on, it really depends on who your boss wants to listen to and where their values lie.
Right.
Because if they put trust in an algorithm to tell them the answer to really complex strategic vision-like questions, that would be quite rare, I think, right? They usually have a group of trusted kind of advisors and the like. Then it's about your ability to synthesize that information and present it in a way, and that's kind of your value to that organization. And like everything in my perspective in the world, it comes back to an issue of learning. Because again, we view learning all too consistently as memorizing, right? On the lower end of Bloom's taxonomy. It's just if I know a bunch of stuff, then I'm valuable. Whereas that's never been the case in terms of our understanding of learning and cognition. It's always the application, the contextual differences between different scenarios and synthesis. That's the higher end, and that's the thing we actually do that we don't realize very consistently, just to succeed and survive every day. And so it will just push our understanding of what we're doing and how we learn more explicitly towards the higher end rather than the lower end of the short term.
Yeah, you talked about Bloom's taxonomy, and I think that's an important point to make. And it doesn't surprise me you bring it up as an educator. Can you explain to the audience what Bloom's taxonomy is? Because I have a follow-up question for you related to it.
Of course. So the Bloom taxonomy is a hierarchy of learning complexity, where there's different types of ways that we assimilate information and then can use that information and create new information. And that is something that goes across a range of difficulties. Learning something new is a whole series of interconnected processes, but at the very first, you probably listen to something or read something and see the fact for what it is, and hopefully you remember that or retain it. But that's not enough, because regurgitating is a very simple robotic retrieval task. That's not a high-level learning order. But then if you wanted to compare this concept to something else, that's a little bit more difficult. You have to know both concepts. You have to understand the intangibles and the essentials within each of those concepts to be able to draw an argument. And then you go all the way up the top, which is what we do in science, where we can't just rely on the previous information. We have to construct a new understanding from scratch and new knowledge through research publications and experiments at a lab. And so that's really the highest order of Bloom's taxonomy. And it's by far the hardest thing to achieve consistently. And also at the moment, it's the thing that AI doesn't appear to be able to truly do. Its tricks still seem to be synthesizing existing pools of information, not creating genuine original thought. That last bit still is human.
And I think the top two tiers of Bloom's is synthesis, and some people would argue that sometimes it's creativity at the very peak, however you define creativity. But which is a step, probably is definitely a step up from synthesis in my opinion. But to your point, the first three levels are really around memorization and very basic processes of learning. And from an educator's point of view, and I think even from an organizational leadership point of view, that's an important thing to be aware of, because how we construct training for employees or how we construct education experiences for students, we might not have to in the future worry so much about those lower order levels of Bloom's taxonomy, right? Like I don't know if Australia has community colleges. In the States, we have community colleges which just focus on undergrad experiences and their transfer pathway, their transfer schools for students to move into the university or a private college or wherever they might want to go. But we tend to focus on the lower level of Bloom's, with during those first 2 years of undergraduate education. And I guess maybe in the future, do you think we won't have to worry about that part as much? Or that'll be a shorter pathway and we'll need to emphasize the higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy instead?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on this, but I'll save you the particulars of every kind of direction it could go. But my first thought is going to be to say that they're lower on Bloom's taxonomy doesn't say they're not valuable, right? So there is value to build that initial scaffold in your mind of a hierarchy of information, to know where to put the new information you're going to have. That takes time.
Schemas, right? It's building schemas that you can...
Yeah, exactly right. So if you asked a primary school student, we call them primary school here, so primary school students to solve a complex problem without giving them the information to begin with, that could be kind of jumping in too deep into the pool. But so that's my first thought. But my second part of it is that the lower end of Bloom's taxonomy is a lot quicker to design teaching and learning activities around, especially assessment. It's super easy to write an exam question and say, hey, just tell me the definition of this term. But to actually write and assess authentically around a concept that you want students to compare and synthesize, that takes a lot more time, not just to design, but also to teach it and to grade it. So that's where the stumbling block has been in my area, that there's so much information in any scientific topic. It's really easy to design a subject or a course with, hey, here's all the information about this topic, all the facts. But if you want to assess them really genuinely and want them to become independent, problem-solving, critical thinkers, then asking them to regurgitate those facts in an exam won't really help with that process. And so there's a lot of double talk going on. Like a lot of scientists say, hey, it's really important to have critical problem-solving when you graduate. But then in terms of how you assess them, it's still very much that lower-end retrieval that you're asking students to do. And it's down to time and cost, which we have little of and increasingly less of in our sector. Yeah.
What are you going to actually inevitably tell your students then, and how to use Chat GPT? Because I agree with everything you said, except that now they can cheat, right? And I know we're kind of like ignoring that subject matter because we're saying that there's great opportunity there, but there is this sort of like opportunity for a student to say, I'm not going to learn about the taxonomy because all I have to do is type in these terms and come up with a really cool answer utilizing, whether it's Chat GPT, there'll be others, right? This is just the first now. There's going to be a bunch initially. And so what are you telling your students how to leverage this tool, do you think, moving forward, at least for 2023?
The good thing is I'm buying myself some time by spending time on podcasts talking to people about this, because my semester hasn't started yet. I don't actually know what I'm going to tell my students when it gets started. But it's a process that I've started over a number of years, because it comes down to assessment design. for me. And a few years ago, I moved away from traditional sort of laboratory reports. So it's a very common assessment construct in science to say, hey, you go into the lab, you do 10 weeks worth of labs, and then the assessment is to write a report. Okay. So I've tried to move away from that and instead given students complex data right from the beginning of the semester, like in this huge spreadsheet with all of these different microbiome figures and stats and that kind of stuff. And they will go through and do those experiments again and collect even more data. But the exercise isn't to kind of report on something you've done in a very simplistic way, but is to actually analyze someone else's data and then communicate it in a couple of different ways. So communicate it to a scientific audience, which is again primarily through a kind of a research report, but also to communicate it to the general public through either things like a short podcast, not an hour-long podcast. I couldn't listen to a 400-hour-long
You might not be able to listen to this one.
I can do that. A podcast segment is what I asked them to submit to explain the findings of that cool piece of data, and as well as to make videos to explain it to the general public. And then I think in those assessment tasks, I could be very upfront to say you might want to brainstorm your explanation to, because I always say, yeah, talk about it to your friends and family and see if they understand what you're saying, but they could brainstorm it to AI and type their explanation to AI and see what the different parallels are, because it's not a written explanation that I'm assessing for in the end. You know, I'm assessing for like nonverbal communication and how they package it and what visual stimulus they're using if it's in video. So then it plugs into the workflow quite neatly in a kind of a reasonable way. Then that assessment design permits for the integration of AI and for it to be more transparent. But if it was simply write me an essay on why microbiomes are interesting, if it was kind of at that level, then that's a much more difficult conversation to have, because of what do you do then? You know, well, what do you actually do? So I think changing the assessment design will be the way that we can kind of accommodate it into our classrooms for the next few
years. I think plagiarism, plagiarism is nothing new under the sun. You know, we're dealing with that since time immemorial in higher education, right? So, and I've always held that it's often plagiarism is the result of poorly designed curriculum, that you've made it too easy for students to cheat. And that's not always the case. Students are going to be clever and get around things. And, there's technology you might not be aware of that they're getting access to, and that can blindside you. But often you can solve a lot of plagiarism and academic integrity issues just by the way you design assignments. I love what's your approach, with using videos and podcasting. I think that's a very progressive educational approach, and it makes sense that you won an award for best university teacher of the year.
Yeah, and I think the conversation around academic integrity has to be on the technology end. Has to be, hey, can we stop them from using that technology? I'm luckily not actually in that space myself, having to find the technology and intervene. But I think the much more effective thing, the literature bears it out, is to change the culture around the incentives to do it. And I think a big part of that is not just within your course. It's like institutionally, what's the schedule, So, but certainly from the teacher perspective, assessment design is how I can discourage that kind of behavior. But yeah, it's kind of bigger than
I got two thoughts on that. One is the response to what Dan you just said, and that is that plagiarism's always been around. I think that is true, but you've also are greasing the wheels for these abilities now. And so again, people will kind of go towards ease of use, and plagiarizing was a little bit harder. You could easily get caught, or not easily, you could get caught. This is easy. This is really, really easy to plagiarize. I mean, it's just and soon it'll be on your phone, and I'll go, Google, tell me something, and I'll go to Chat GPT and give it to me. Google, import that into my Word document. Bam, it's in my. So you grease the wheels. Again, I think it's different, but I really like this notion about this integrity part you're talking about, because it does seem like it's a relationship with information that we need to explore as we move forward, going into what it means to be human and our relationship with information. Is it important? Is there a personal integrity to actually retain the facts, to hold the data so that we can then synthesize that stuff in a purely, I'm going to come communist here, but in a purely capitalist world, I just want to make the buck. So it doesn't matter how I get to those dollars, probably, if I can persuade people whether I actually know the information or not. So I have a feeling the way the system and structure is set up right now, it is in conflict with that sort of personal reference integrity to information as we think about it.
A couple points here. I think you're right in the capitalist aspect, right? Not every culture views borrowing information and not crediting, citing the sources as plagiarism, right? There are some cultures that are like, well, whatever, it's open to the public. We're a collectivist mindset in our culture, and it's just what it is. And there is a capitalist aspect to our concepts of plagiarism. That's for sure. And I think, there's this whole idea of information literacy, especially in the library sciences, that is really important. That speaks to the ethical aspects of information and how we handle information in an ethical way, and also is supposed to help students and others know how to interpret information, how to assess it and evaluate the information for its value and quality. And I think what Chat GPT is going to drive is an increased emphasis on information literacy. How can people become better consumers of information, and how can they learn how to use the information in an ethical way?
I don't see that at all. I really don't. I think that that sounds.
There's going to be there's going to be people who are going to do
somewhere in the middle.
I'm coming from an educator's point of view, and what we need to be teaching students in terms of how to use this technology.
And and I think we can all agree that the world of the school of the education world and those ethics that are probably still strong there in so many areas. Once you cross that barrier into the enterprise world, into the work world, I don't want to say it gets left behind willy-nilly, but it does start to get chiseled away pretty easily and pretty quickly. And so that information, that the integrity of knowing kind of gets pushed aside to just trying to make a buck, get ahead, get your boss to recognize you, because there's ways to do it without actually having to go through the hard work of, hey, I actually know this data. I'm actually blah, blah, blah. I can write a dissertation on this. Not necessary anymore, So I think there's a divide there.
Yeah, and my 2 cents on it are, first of all, if we're having existential crises about this technology, I wonder what students are thinking if they don't know what direction or what career to take, and all the jobs that we're doing presumably have changed in our value just within the last couple of months. I wonder what they're thinking about what area to head into. And that could be the conversation starter for how they integrate this technology responsibly into their workflows. Because if we're worried about our jobs that we already have, they should be worried about the jobs they're yet to have and have to find in the future. And this, my second thought on this is that in my experience, so I do academic and career counseling for a lot of students as well. The thing that gets them ahead in any career, and we speak to employers about this as well, is less and less the knowledge. They kind of associate, well, if you've got a university degree, then we're confident you've got some knowledge, but it's all around that communication, that team building, those soft skills. Those are the skills that separate the people who ascend kind of quite quickly through the ranks versus those who don't. And so it's really interesting to put this to the test even more when that knowledge piece gets further devalued, as you said. And then just how are we teaching for the soft skills? Or where are the students developing these soft skills? Because in my experience, it's harder for young people to kind of connect with others increasingly. So that will be the next question for the job market.
Which brings us back to Jodah's point earlier in the episode around smartphones and the internet. And do you think those are, the technology around smartphones and iPads and all that kind of stuff, do you think that has had an impact on why students have a harder time with developing some of those soft skills?
Definitely so, but also they're here to stay, right? So we're not going to legislate those away anytime soon. And what's actually really interesting to me, and it's not the soft skills is a very umbrella term, right? Like communication,
collaboration,
skills,
stuff like
term.
that.
But collaboration. So it's not the thing that you think. Like if you ask them, for example, to make a 3-minute video. Like I struggled so much learning how to do that initially. It took me years. I'm still not super comfortable on camera, but all of them seem pretty confident on camera. And I've seen this like on the news. Like That's exactly it. So you interview the average young person on the street, the news, they all seem so confident and charismatic. If you asked the 15-year-old version of me to answer a news reporter's question live, I would just be incoherent. So they're way more advanced on that side of things, right? Like it's strange. It's not the thing you would think, but it's the just beneath the surface, like to actually establish those genuine, authentic, long-lasting connections instead of just the facsimile of charisma and kind of connectivity. So it's that genuine authenticity to the communication that they seem to struggle with, right? Or they seem to have problems filtering out what are the things they should be talking about versus things that you probably shouldn't be talking about. That seems to be the thing I've seen. And that is something that I'm sure smartphones aren't helping with. But maybe instead of when we teach communication, for instance, maybe we shouldn't be spending as much time on, hey, make eye contact and that kind of stuff. It should be, hey, how like the basics, right? The obvious things you can see, but maybe we should spend time talking about, hey, like how do you actually like genuinely find out about another person's work in a way that would spark not just your own curiosity, but their curiosity? Or what's the art of conversation? Like, how do you actually engage someone? Like, maybe we should be thinking about that direction as opposed to all the traditional things we think about. Like,
that's interesting.
That is fascinating.
And look people in the eyes.
That's
and
interesting.
I don't think the phones are the whole
No.
problem.
I don't think it's definitely not. And it's just clearly it's what I think what's kind of termed as a complex dynamic problem, right? In the sense that it's a feedback loop. Each thing begats the other thing, and so to be able to predict what was going to happen with phones and the cell phone when it was the iPhone and the smartphones as to today, I think you might have been 20% correct, right? There were too many other feedback loops that were going to affect that. And that's going to be the same thing for this technology. To your point, it's folly to really. I was going to try to write an article for my company about what Chat GPT means for information security. The most mundane, rudimentary thoughts. I'm thinking, whoever's going to exploit this is going to do it in such a novel way that's going to blow my mind. I'm not even going to build. I would never even guessed it, and they'll do it. So it's a tough call. But with that soapbox rant, Jack, you mentioned in our previous conversation before we recorded that you do kind of are thinking about what you're going to tell your students, and you kind of hinted at it, but I was wondering if we could just get a clear thought from you on that. It's like, what would you tell your students about how to approach this technology? No, let me rephrase that. What do you tell your students how to approach their choices of moving forward, knowing that this technology now exists? What would be your advice to them?
So my advice is, first of all, within the confines of what I'm teaching them in the classroom. So just for this semester, like there's some practical advice and there's some long-term advice, which I don't roll out all the time. I don't take up students' time with kind of my perspective on where they should be heading all the time. But if they ask, I'll share it. So within the confines of my classroom, I think I'll just say this platform exists. It would be silly for me to not acknowledge that Chat GPT is a thing and not to acknowledge that if it's still free for everyone to access during the semester, that you shouldn't consider it to become more efficient at some part of the process of studying, right? You should consider using it. I'm using it. Here's my video on it. I've talked about how I'm using it. So just be transparent about it. But then to have that next more difficult discussion, which is, first of all, how much are you able to trust not just the accuracy of the information, but the pertinence or the relevancy for the information for your target audience that you're trying to communicate to. And then it comes back to Dan's point about information literacy, which is a big topic in our area and science in general. Information literacy and science literacy is very, very low across the board. Probably because most people haven't had to think about science that much
but
until very
everyone
recently.
On Facebook says, and science says.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, and in my experience, calling everyone idiots is not productive. So I wish it was. I totally wish it was. I totally wish condescension would cut through this, but it doesn't, right? So we have to find another way. So that's the conversation in the classroom, right? So here it is. You should consider using it. I've tried typing in some of the assessment tasks that I've set for you into this platform, and here's what I found. I think that's a really useful conversation starter. And then if the student wanted to ask me about sort of long-term career planning, I'll give them the same advice I've been giving for 10 years, which is that if you go into your career thinking that this is exactly the one thing you're going to do, then the perceived value of that thing that you want to do, if it's super, super clear cut and everyone knows what the job is, that job is going to disappear, right? If the role that you're doing has so much clarity, if everything that you're working on is itemizable on a spreadsheet and someone else can learn how to do that within a week if you give them training, if that's your job and that's what you really aspire to do, fantastic, but you're not really protecting yourself from the future development. So it comes back to lifelong learning. You always have to be learning new skills and expanding the scope of your professional role as opposed to kind of being happy with the confines of what it is. Hopefully not taking on just an unlimited number of things that never ends, but maybe redefining it, shifting it more towards the higher end rather than the lower end. And that is a skill that we have to negotiate with some leverage and career capital as we progress through any kind of job. And so, again, I come from a generalist degree where we encourage that kind of thinking in science. If you did a professional degree where you are training for a very specific job, you probably have a different mindset to that. But that's been my mindset this week.
Yeah, and I want to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about everybody's favorite person in the world, Elon Musk. Everybody's Mr. Popularity. What I find fascinating about this Chat GPT, and this should fuel people's fear of Elon even more, is that he's one of the primary investors of Chat GPT, along with Microsoft. And so, you've got this guy, he has Twitter, he's got Tesla, he's got his space program, he's got Neuralinks, he's got all this kind of stuff happening. Should we be worried about Elon having this power? And what do you think Elon's Chat GPT looks like?
Say something really scary, Jack, so we can put that onto our clip.
Oh, goodness. Because I think anyone in the prediction game of predicting Elon's behavior is in the wrong business, because it's just wildly chaotic. I never know what to expect. Every version of him, week to week, seems to be operating on a completely different level. And I think he would concede that you don't really want to be in his mind, because it's absolutely like bonkers in terms of the leaps of faith that he takes cognitively. I'm more interested in the conversation around Microsoft, because Microsoft seems to be an organization that's a little bit more predictable historically in how it faces innovation, right? So with a chaos agent like Elon Musk, it's so hard to know what's happening next. And yeah, I think we probably should be scared of how he takes it and where he takes it. But then you consider something like Microsoft, which is not that at all. It's very, very corporate enterprise business oriented, which is the furthest thing you want from wild volatility. And they've taken probably an even more aggressive investment strategy than Elon has, right? Like I think the newest agreement that I don't think has been signed yet, they're hoping to have 75% of profits derived from ChatGPT or OpenAI for the next few years. So they've gone all in, and so they must see the value. And they must align with Elon's thinking and a lot of people's thinking in this space in some way. And the running joke is going to be what the Clippy, the paperclip assistant, is going to be supercharged once AI is going to be there, and it's going to be embedded. Your Excel spreadsheets will be on a whole other plane of existence. But I'm wondering how they're thinking about enterprise solutions that integrate AI into the Microsoft Office suite. That's the more interesting question to me, because that will affect us in months, potentially.
No, I could see that happening. Yeah. I mean, you could just dictate and have a conversation with a chatbot while you're working on some sort of document. And I could see it easing the pain of working with something like Excel or another more complicated piece of software, too. You won't have to, if you need help, you'll just be able to ask, hey, chatbot, help me.
I could even probably ask, like, hey, like, I want to ask Dan a question, but I don't really like talking to Dan. I really think, chatbot, what would Dan's answer to be to this question? And it probably would give it to me. I mean, and that is like a path forward. It will model you as it understands you, predict you, know you better than you. So it might even be able to answer questions for you without you even being in the room. doesn't that terrify you?
Yeah.
I mean,
And if you're using, like you're a project manager and you've got all these deliverables and you've got a complex way like that's kind of the higher end application of it. But yeah, it's all terrifying. I think I've learned to be okay with being terrified. I think it's
after like the last 4 years, right? 3 or 4 years.
I just relaxed into being terrified.
Just live in a constant state of terror. Welcome to humanity.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, speaking of which, what does Chat GPT tell us about what it means to be human?
Again, I'm a microbiologist, so I'm not a cognitive psychologist, but my thoughts on are just based on my own experiences, because I thought my main purpose was to synthesize and present information in a relatable way to vast audiences year in, year out, semester in, semester out. I thought that was what my value was. That's what's got me this far. But that value is going to approach zero, if not already at zero very soon, because you could just give it the prompt. I can't be given the prompt. You can't tell me, hey, Jack, talk in the voice of Dan, and I can just do that. I can't do that. I can only talk authentically to me. So that's apparently not my value, and my value and the if you want to extrapolate my value to be the reason for being human is apparently to connect to others. That's apparently my value. That's apparently the reason for our existence, is to be able to use the information out there and connect it to other people. It's as simple as that in many ways.
Yeah, I think I was thinking about education the other day, because I think it's a very human thing, and I work in education. But to get to this question, and to respond to this question myself, and I think part of being a human being is interacting with the world, right? Just that interaction, and I hesitate to say interact with another human being, because an infant isn't always interacting with another human being when it's starting to form its schemas, right? It's interacting with the mobile above it and toys and things like that. So I think that's part of it too, like how we interact with the world. And I don't know if CPG's capable of interacting with the world with any on its own, right? At this point, it doesn't have that thing that's going to make you want to reach out for something or ask a question, right? It's just responsive. And the other thing I would say is the importance of the subjective experience, the qualia of our consciousness, that it cannot replicate yet. And maybe it can never do that. I mean, it depends on where you think consciousness is derived from, which is still an outstanding question. Maybe one day Chat GPT will be able to answer that for us, but it's still, for most of us, a mystery. So I think I guess another aspect for me that this technology brings to the forefront is just, what does it mean to be human, and what makes us unique from a technology like this?
It's interesting. I think it goes back to if I heard, Jack, what you said, and if I processed it, it kind of doesn't matter whether ChatGPT is conscious, not conscious. I think we can argue that I have more consciousness, perhaps, I know it's questionable, than the cockroach, but it doesn't make the cockroach irrelevant in its existence. It doesn't need me to validate itself, whether I can actually drive a car, and it can't. Irrelevant. So whether ChatGPT becomes, in theory, from our schemas, more powerful than it does become SkyNet in a weird way, other than if it's totally controlling the way I live my life, it might be irrelevant. It might really kind of go back to us kind of configuring, looking back at ourselves, our humanity, identifying perhaps again, I think echoing kind of the things you were saying, Jack, that it's either soft skills or hard sciences will be kind of the thing of the future. And then perhaps throw in some love and pull those pieces together. And that inevitably, whether we are being run by an overlord of SkyNet, may be kind of irrelevant, because as long as we know who we are, we don't need to compare ourselves to anything. And maybe it's a way for us to kind of look back at ourselves again.
And the most chilling thing I've read or heard this week is the way the people who work in AI talk about this SkyNet issue, right? Of AI becoming sentient and doing us harm. And if it can figure out what it thinks the reason for being human is, and if that reason is to be subjugated or to be destroyed, if that sort of thing. So this is what they refer to it, and they call it the alignment problem. It's like, well, what do you mean by the alignment problem? It's like, well, how will AI eventually figure out if its interests aligns with that of humanities? And then their solution to the alignment problem is we need to get AI advanced enough so that it can figure this question out for us. It's like, what? Is that your solution? Your solution is to get it to figure out how to not hurt us? Like, so that's the scariest thing I heard. They call it the alignment problem. So there you go. Some food for thought.
Research like that and doom scroll about that.
So the problem of AI, again, it goes back to not like fundamentally, because that perhaps the answer for our personal meaning we can discover through reading some Jack Handy books. But really the problem is a relationship between Chat GPT and Boston Dynamics. That's really what we got to be afraid of.
Yeah. So Jack, I know we're coming to the end of our hour together, and one question we like to ask all of our guests is, what are the key takeaways after having this hour-long conversation? What are some of the key takeaways you think the audience should walk away with after turning off this podcast, if they're even still here?
I recommend that you go out there and use this platform as long as you can, for as often as you can while it's still free, because I think there's talk of a subscription model coming out. And if you're concerned, all the things you're concerned about in life, see what the platform says and really see how advanced it is really in your own context. I've tested it within the realm of my job. I should really test it within the realm of like, hey, can I be a better dad, or can you teach me how to be a better husband? Those kinds of things as well in my personal life. Try it out and just see how replaceable you really are in your own context.
If I could really stop you for a second, because we did a little bit of that. Jodah and I did some experimentation with that, and one thing we found was that the responses were very conventional, right? And so it wasn't really surprising. But I think you're right there too. But it's an interesting experiment.
Yeah, and the other thing I've heard is that it's been tuned during the release cycle, like how aggressive the responses are, and how because the like people asking how to build bombs and that kind of stuff, right? So they have to kind of tune it and put safeguards in as the rollout has happened. But really to think about the idea and the concept of ongoing learning and how you can always be adding new skills, whether it be a personal or professional life, because at the end of the day, that is what's going to safeguard us against not just this innovation, but any innovation. And maybe what you want to learn next will change as a result of what you think the AI platform can do in your place.
Yeah. So Jack,
dig it.
How can people contact you? Where can they find your channel, watch your videos, which are amazing? Jack does a really good job putting his videos together. And they're not just all about Chat GPT. You've been doing it, putting together videos about teaching science for a while.
Yeah, so thanks for the opportunity to plug it. So my YouTube channel is called Biolab Collective with Jack Wang. You can find it also by my website, jackwang.com.au. I've also started a weekly free Substack newsletter. It's called Crossover Connections. Yeah, so any of those three, Biolab Collective on YouTube, my website, jackwang.com.au, or my Crossover Connections.
And I would second, definitely watch the YouTube channel. I mean, Jack Wang is one of the most easy to listen to, relaxed, terrified people you can watch a show on. It's a good watch. So definitely,
relaxing and terrifying at the same time. What a mix!
I didn't say it was terrifying. I didn't say it was terrifying.
The most at peace person with being
that's
terrified.
Right. Most at peace person for being terrified.
Well, we'll put links to his shows or his channels and Substack in our show notes, and we'll also link it. We'll also add it to our channels on our channel. So, Jack, thanks for being on the show. We hope to have you back at some time to continue the conversation around this and other things, hopefully. So, thank you.
Thanks, man. It's great.
Thanks, Dan and Jodah. It's been fun.
Yeah, it has been fun. Yeah, and definitely let's do it again.
Take care, everybody.